It is a pleasure to welcome Michael Rowan and Ambassador Otto Reich to Heritage Foundation. If you wish to start an intense political discussion in Washington, just mention President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela and then link it with another word: democracy, petroleum, poverty, anti-Americanism. The sparks quickly begin to fly. In the Chavista world, full of true believers and celebrity endorsers, the number of investigators and analysts ready to take a serious, sober look at President Chavez is limited. The information void, which I believe is still out there, has been admirably filled by Michael Rowan and Douglas Shawn in The Threat Closer to Home: Hugo Chavez and the War Against America. It was published recently by the Free Press and is the focus point of our discussions today. I invite Michael and Ambassador Reich in the hour before us to respond to two basic questions. First, what is the nature of the Chavez challenge? How does it impact Venezuela, where economic freedom, as measured by the Heritage Foundation Wall Street Journal's 2009 Index of Economic Freedom and individual liberty, is plummeting, but also the Western Hemisphere and the global geopolitical stage? What can the U.S. under the Obama administration do to advance a vigilant, tough-minded Latin American policy that protects our interest and supports friends ready to stand against Chavez's anti-Americanism and tide of authoritarian populism? First of all, I'd like to introduce Michael Rowan, who is the co-author of The Threat Closer to Home. He is a political consultant and newspaper columnist who lived in Caracas from 1993 until 2006. A Democrat, he is a former president of the International Association of Political Consultants with campaign experience in 14 nations since 1970. In Venezuela's 2006 presidential election, he was a strategist for Governor Manuel Rosales. Ambassador Reich is president of Otto Reich Associates. He served as Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere Affairs from 2001 to 2002, and was Special Envoy for the Western Hemisphere Initiatives from 2002 to 2004. During the Reagan-Bush years, he was Ambassador to Venezuela, Special Advisor to the Secretary of State, and Director of the Office of Public Diplomacy for Latin America and the Caribbean, and an Assistant Administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, in charge of U.S. economic assistance in Latin America and the Caribbean. First of all, we'd like Michael to come up and make a few comments to tell us a little bit about the book. And secondly, we'll invite Ambassador Reich to the podium to make additional comments and a response.
Thanks, Ray. Good day. Let me thank the Heritage Foundation and Ray Walser in particular for having me speak to you today about The Threat Closer to Home, Hugo Chavez and the War Against America, and I'll try and answer your two questions. And I thank Ambassador Otto Reich for joining me today to speak about this threat, which in my view is being ignored at great peril in America. Doug Schoen and I, two Democrats, tell this story with no partisan or ideological agenda. We have no axe to grind about Chavez. National security is not a partisan matter as far as we're concerned. As political consultants, we've worked in over a dozen nations at the highest electoral levels, including the United States, Israel, Venezuela, and Bolivia. And we know what's going on in Iran and in Cuba. I've lived in Venezuela from 1993 to 2006. I wrote over 500 columns and articles about the political economies of Latin America. And I was the strategist for Claudio Fermin's campaign in his presidential campaign of 1993, which is why I went down there, met my wife, Maria de la Rosa, married there, stayed there. I was also the strategist for Manuel Rosales in his presidential campaign of 2006. In both those campaigns, we proposed variations of the Alaska solution to oil and poverty, which I helped create in the 1970s. Some of you might be familiar with that that model that essentially wiped out poverty among the native population. Neither of the winners in the elections in Venezuela, however, Rafael Caldera in 1993, Hugo Chavez in 2006, invested Venezuela's oil money in the free tools of free wealth creation for free people. The result in both cases produced poverty and corruption. Venezuela's productivity has been falling since nationalization of oil and industry in 1976. Today, it is the richest failed state in the world. This is not the way it has to be, and this is not the way it was. From the 1930s to the 1960s, Venezuela had the highest consistent economic growth rate and the lowest inflation rate in the world. But I'm not here to talk about how Venezuela got it wrong. You don't have enough time for me to hear that. But how America has got Chavez wrong. Chavez is a state sponsor of terror. He has supported the FARC in Colombia and terrorists in Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, with oil, with money, with weapons, with passports, with political support, and not just in the Middle East conflicts, but in Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Ecuador, Argentina, and Nicaragua, for a few. He operates a weekly flight between Caracas and Tehran that has no passenger lists, no immigration controls, no materials accounting, open to international inspection. To get on that plane, you need to be approved by Iranian and Venezuelan security. You can get your ticket from a Caracas travel agent who is designated by the US Treasury Department as a Hezbollah agent and money launderer. In Lebanon and Tehran, on the other side of that flight, there's a Venezuelan diplomat who is also designated as a Hezbollah agent. He facilitates money laundering and transfers of people and material between Venezuela and Hezbollah in the Middle East. Two governments are now investigating a plot where Hezbollah in Venezuela will kidnap Latin American Jews and sequester them in Lebanon. Last month, 7 of the 11 people arrested for trashing a Caracas synagogue were in the employ of Hugo Chavez, who called the break-in a simple robbery, a 2-bit burglary. But the only thing stolen from the synagogue was a computer file with the name of every Jewish family along with their addresses and net worth. Hezbollah, in effect, has the kidnap list. In our book, we connect these dots. Jewish Venezuelans have also done so. A population of 30,000 Jewish Venezuelans has dropped by more than half since 1999. By his own words, Chavez is conducting an asymmetric war against America, which he calls the evil empire, and Israel, which he says is perpetrating a Holocaust against the people of Palestine. He called President Bush the devil at the United Nations, and he says that President Obama smells of the same stench, the same sulfur he smelled at the podium of the UN. He wants the presidents of the United States and Israel to be prosecuted internationally for the war in Gaza. In 2006, Chavez got 77 votes, national votes, to sit on the United Nations Security Council. His campaign message was to let Iran develop its nuclear program. Leave them alone. In 2007, the Colombian government confiscated 30 kilos of non-enriched uranium in a safe house identified in the computer files of Raul Reyes, the FARC leader, who was killed in Ecuador, an Ecuador raid by Colombian forces in March of that year. In 2008, Chavez got the Russians to give him nuclear technology for processing uranium. Chavez says it's for peaceful purposes, but why the country with the most oil and gas in the continent and huge, cheap hydropower needs nuclear power has not been explained.